Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. With pleasure to have a chance to have all of you on this important conversation. So my name is Emmanuel Tron, H2H Network Head of Outreach and Engagement. I'm going to chair this session, supported by Leah Krishneva from Internews, and we have three eminent Sudanese local media specialist colleagues online. I hope everything's going to be okay, technically speaking. And the idea is to have very interactive conversations. We're going to have a couple of questions and trends and illustrations provided by our panelists, but also opening the floor on a regular basis for you, for the audience online and here with us today. So I think it's important to, through this session, to value first the central role of local media in conflict setting and in environments where humanitarian actors are evolving. And it's not, historically speaking, medias and local medias are always been part of a reflection of the humanitarian action. But today, through this session, we would like to engage with our panelists on a couple of trends, specific challenges and opportunities when we look at the emergence of new medias, the involvement of citizens in media reporting and different ways to collect information, and all the challenges associated to it. And we're going to take the example of situation in Sudan, which is not an easy case considering the conflict situation since April last year, and where the access in general is extremely limited, with deliberate attacks against civilians and also journalists on a regular basis, lawyers, human rights militants, and facilities. It's really a context where we have seen also very important informations from the parties to the conflicts that put on different media's channels the ethnic cleansing, mass graves, illustrations, and this type of thing. So how to work, how to collect information in such circumstances, how to engage between different type of actors in urban settings, in rural settings, in the different areas where civilians are affected. I think we're going to try to discuss all of this with our panelists. And just to say a word on H2H Network, we have supported a group of members that are on daily basis engaging with media information support, journalism activities, and also research and analysis about trends for civilian situation and information about security dimensions in conflict environments. So part of them were the new humanitarian in Security Insight, DMAC, Impact Initiatives, and today through the panelists we have CDAC. That has been extremely involved at Internews, and I would like to thank them for this. Let me present briefly the panelists. So we, as a first panelist, we have Khadija El Nadief Aga Mohamed. She's a Sudanese extremely engaged in the humanitarian field since almost 2 decades. We can say she's a protection program specialist at the UN level because she has worked with different UN agencies from UNMISS to UNHCR, passing through UNICEF, and she's to date UNICEF protection officer and in charge and specialist on prevention and sexual exploitation and abuse. She's also engaging as a CDAC expert. So Khadija is going to provide us a set of the scene with regards to the situation in Sudan and the working conditions of journalists in particular, and how to collect information today there. Our second panelist, Asia Kambal, she's a communication specialist staff of Internews as a humanitarian liaison. She has worked with different humanitarian institutions, the ICRC and MSF, Doctors Without Borders. She has been engaged in trying to make civilians and affected community understanding some issues related to media, and also to be confident about media information, particularly involved during the COVID-19 with a trust project, and then pushing to make sure there's good understanding and not false rumors about what's going on. So Asia is going to provide us also very interesting insights with regards communication and the links between communication around humanitarian elements, but as well elements that goes beyond and engaging on rights and other aspects. And last but not least, Musa Baba is the director of the Giza Group, which is a media operator and is working on access to justice. So I can say, he's an activist engaging in the civil society as a media trainer and a technical consultant on media, human rights, and NGO working groups, and evolving in not only in Sudan, but in other parts in Africa. So thank you very much for your participation today. And I would like to give the floor to you, Khadija, first, perhaps to illustrate for the audience today the current situation, and also what you would consider as the local media working conditions in terms of access, in terms of needs of communities and expectations from them. What do you see are opportunities and challenges also for local Sudan journalists? And perhaps give a words about your specific project at CDAC and for the activities during the past months. Thank you very much.
We can't hear you yet.
First technical issue, and last. Sure.
Hello.
That's
Hello.
better.
Okay. Sorry. Good morning. Good afternoon. Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. It is my pleasure to be with you today, speaking about what is going on and the suffering that faces many of Sudanese population in Sudan, and the media, and how journalists also affected by this ongoing conflict. And then we'll be passing by opportunities and challenges maybe, and how we can also advocate together to support more and to make sure that our people of concerns and their voices also are reached and represented with us. Okay, let me start by the ongoing conflict. Of course, as you see, there is already the security constraints that restricted many of the people to access, including the humanitarian aid workers and the journalists. Access is an issue for us, and we're trying to advocate for safe corridors through different channels and different forums. Movement restrictions, also some of the communities and some of the journalists as well trapped into a place where they cannot move because of RSF control the movement and hindering them from moving out, and delivering the life assistance also is an issue based on that. People cannot also get out to get their means of life and food. Also, there is a lot of complex circumstances in terms of process from the RSF, the areas that controlled by RSF and also by SAF, we can say. A lot of checklists, a lot of difficulties for both actors and journalists also to be presented in in same localities or same locations, so that they can also provide assistance or scale up the response in that areas. The limited funding, because most of the humanitarian aid workers, whom majority are now local actors and initiatives, is still facing funding issue, and Sudan unfortunately recently become out of the spot, and we are trying also maybe through this forum to bring it up, and then to shed lights on the suffering of the Sudanese people, and also to advocate more and more. There is a lot of grave violation against children and, of course, against women. Hundred of cases per week, if it is not per months, against the young women and girls, perpetrated by both parties. The bulk of them may be unseen in the surface by against the RSF, unfortunately. And the recent area that attack by RSF in Jazeera represent this catastrophe, problems and catastrophe issues related to women and children. The mental distress and the psychological problems also one of the main areas and the gaps that we as humanitarian aid workers trying to address it, but we don't have like a proper intervention for the people on the ground. Maybe the technicalities, the specialists are not also there. We have only very small interventions, which is not meet the high need for the people. Our work with SIDAC before, we managed to establish for the first time the Sudan AAP working group, accountability to the affected population and community engagement working group, under the surge of OSHA at that time in 2020. And then we continued our efforts until recently, after also passing by the Tigray response, passing by the other intervention in Sudan through OSHA as well. And we have that legacy ongoing, and we have the AAP working group addressing the communication and reaching out to the community and accountability part. Uh, Still OSHA also and SIDAC provided support, and in the beginning of the conflict of Sudan, SIDAC provided us with the ISC materials and trainings for the helpline for the frontline workers and the humanitarian aid responders, and designed also materials for people with disabilities and people with special needs. Uh, Going back to the current situation of media in Sudan, we can say that the information landscape has become very fragmented. Digital information environment is consisted of constant is weaponized. The Sudanese journalist reported closure of printing and broadcast of media with outlet in Khartoum, therefore largely inoperative due to insecurity and the displacement. So our example of impact on the local media, we have a lot of attack against the journalists, injuries, detention, harassment, and killing as well. And the state TV headquarters used as a military operation, as you know. And recently we heard that SAF trying to make it free from the RSF. Uh, there is a widespread of communication blockout, which is affecting the whole entire Sudan during the last couple months. People become like out of any information, and impacted the reaching out and to information and even to the humanitarian response. So they rely on the Starlink for broadcasting, for media, and the humanitarian response as well. In a conflict, communication is always a critical lifeline. The ability to access, share, trust information can be different between life and death. Information decision about where to shelter, who to trust, and where to get is very, very important and crucial. Documented in the ARISE project, which is CDAC, Internews, DMAC, funded by H2H, people are increasingly relying on the alternative channels like social media and peer-to-peer networks to both generate uh, and access to vital survival information, especially in Khartoum, where people have turned to social media to seek information from community networks, both within the country and broaderly. Indeed, it is a significant number of diaspora initiatives. There are a lot of significant, or many of them, has been focusing on sharing critical information on the conflict and providing resources to this, looking to the Sudan situation. So the issues of misinformation and disinformation, which is led us to a weak fact checking, despite the critical role that the local channels remain largely disconnected from the formalized humanitarian response. Barriers including language, understanding the jargons, and navigating to the complex coordination structure, hindering local and diaspora actors' ability to plug into the broader response. This undermines overall efforts and effectiveness. So that such complex of Sudan context is creating a lot of um, difficulties and a lot of access issues. But still, despite all these challenges, there is the room where we can have a hope, and there are some opportunities. So for opportunities, we make speak about reporting on the critical issues. Still, the journalist can speak and put some reports about critical information and critical issues in the humanitarian need, the human rights, and the abuse, the corruption. This also is still there. Promoting peace building and dialogue. And we can see also some steps started, like mobilizing communities to work through that dialogue and encouraging this as well. The voices of people also and the marginalized communities can be also reached through that. Still, also we can see some opportunities of to rise of independent media, like those who are still operating, particularly the online one, and social media. Many people, especially the youth and the young people, are relying on that information on the social media and on the live in general online media. The increase of the demand for local news and information. Always people trying to seek what is new in the media, what is there, who's publishing, what is broadcasting. And there are also potential for collaboration with international media organization, and I can see also many of actors similar to such as Internews and others advocate for more triangulation between local actors and the international media organization. Maybe there is a risk also, the risk associated to the physical safety threats and sometimes detention and killing as well. All this faced the journalists, and during the last three past weeks, we had a case of a killing of journalists in Umdurman. Arbitrary arrest, detention also, difficulties to access information or conducting the professional investigation or meeting with people. All these are also created a risk for the humanitarian and the local media staff as well. These challenges, and including governmental restrictions, access to the free press, intimidation, harassment to the journalists, and lack of resources, maybe also training to the media, and lack of funding. All this need maybe some type of advocacy or support. And from here, maybe I can also raise my voice that yes, we understand that the humanitarian organization and the international community is doing a lot, but still we need more. We need more. We need to put like pressures on the two conflicting parties, because this war is unjustified. Why Sudanese simple and innocent population pay their life against what we can see now between the two conflicting parties, there is no justification for this war. So there is still many efforts need from your side, and we are also hoping that peace talks, dialogue to be also resumed soon between the two parties and to stop this war. Thank you. Over to you, Emmanuel and colleagues there.
Thank you very much, Khadija. Thank you for your presentation and témoignage about the current situation and the challenges you are facing on daily basis, operating on the ground. Perhaps I would like to now go a bit deeper on the social media and the role they play. As you explained, there is this fragmentation and emergence of kind of spontaneous journalist as a citizen in Sudan to cover probably the departure, as you explained, of many traditional journalists that have been put under major risk directly by the different parties to the conflict, and how this emergence of social media and their role as citizen in the media participate to a new media business model, creation of information and coverage. So I think Asia and Musab is going to provide us a couple of example and illustration of different forms of distribution, as well different ways of engaging. Asia, please, would you like to start?
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to keep my camera on for a few seconds, but I'm going to have to turn it off because of the connectivity. Thank you for this opportunity. I wanted to highlight the nature of this armed conflict in Sudan is actually quite different in terms of demographic and targeted areas. Because it is an urban armed conflict. It affects a lot of the urban centers and the cities, the capitals in different parts of the country. And so a lot of people impacted by this conflict rely on social media to share and also to get access to information, to address their information needs, but also to address their humanity. Since the start of this conflict, we saw that people were really using social media in a unique and different way. People were looking for information about safe routes, about transportation options, about the price for tickets. People were searching for their loved ones. Can someone go, for example, and check on my dad in Bahri? Can someone check on my son or my kids who are stuck in school in Riyadh? So people were using social media to get updates about their loved ones and make sure that they were safe and okay. But they were also using it to look for information, as I noted, on safe routes. And this continues to be the case, that people rely on social media to get this type of information. People were also looking for information as the conflict prolonged, information about refugee status, about asylum procedures, about rights and options. People are also looking for information about visa procedures and travel routes, but also evacuation support. If there was someone close by to, for example, to evacuate their grandfather or an older family member. And so these were ways that people were looking for information, but also sharing information and sharing advice and sharing their experiences, their personal experience of displacement, their journey, for instance, from Khartoum and then until they reached Egypt, or their journey from a conflict area to a safer area within the country. As Khadija noted, that people are looking for critical life-saving information, and that communication and information can be life-saving. And we see many examples of this in how delayed information and information that is not of the best quality can affect people. For instance, in terms of protection, we're seeing people like survivors or their families of GBV survivors or friends looking for support for them, looking for information on how to, on the first steps following a case of rape. What do I do? How do I support my loved one? For instance, there was a woman that posted in a private group that her sister had gone through rape and that she had been given her a Panadol as a form of, as a type of pill to prevent pregnancy. And she said that she had been taking this pill for 36 days and that her period hadn't come. And so she was super concerned. And then some of the health practitioners within the group were giving her some advice. And so delayed information can really impact people's lives in unimaginable ways. In addition, people were asking about how to deal with mortars or unexploded ordinances that had fell on their homes or in their neighborhood. More recently, within this week, we saw a really harrowing post shared on X. Someone asked, what are the trees that we can consume that, what are suitable trees for children to eat? And what plants can we use to sterilize water? And are there trees that are safe to eat in Darfur? And this is really revealing. This is a testimony of a deteriorating food security situation and people trying to find solutions. In fact, there were several responses, but I just wanted to share one of the responses to this post was that someone shared a link to an previous Oxfam report about the Bahr al-Ghazal famine. Bahr al-Ghazal today is in South Sudan, of course, but of the famine that took place in Bahr al-Ghazal in 1988 and 2017, and the type of food people consume to survive, indigenous foods that communities relied on to survive during this time. So when we say information and can be life-saving, it really is in this case. And there are just so many different ways that people are using information and looking for information. And there's Khadija touched on this, peer-to-peer support and mutual aid is a key factor in this response. And it has always been in any humanitarian response. We always say the first responders are the ones that are there from the beginning. They are the affected communities. But we're no longer at first responders stage in Sudan. It's a year since the outbreak of this conflict, and communities are still pooling the little resources that they have to survive, to support each other. And there's a food crisis, there's a water crisis, but there's also a communication crisis where parts of the country don't have access to internet, don't have access to phone, and how that affects their affected people impacted by conflict and displacement, their opportunity to communicate. I've never seen an example so clear where communication, access to internet and phone meant survival, as I've seen in my own country, Sudan, where people rely on e-banking to support community kitchens that provide food support to hundreds of thousands of families, and how e-banking helps in terms of purchasing food, purchasing water, accessing healthcare, accessing medicine, finding a way to evacuate, to move from an insecure area to a safer area. So really communication, access to internet, access to phone means survival. Maybe further on, we can also speak about how these informal ways of communicating and how the absence of institutional information providers and the media has affected the access to quality information, and how that puts people online looking for reliable and timely information at risk of harm. So I'll hand it over to Musa or to you, Emmanuel.
Yes, thank you so much, Asia, for these elements and all of these examples and the daily basis role of social media. And definitely, Musa, if you can jump in on how you see the social media navigating and between disinformation, misinformation, the different forms of distribution and media assets to engage, and what you see as again opportunities for better covering humanitarian issues, but as well more civilian issues, and what you see as inherent challenges so far. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to Khadija and Asia also for kind of laying very solid. With the media landscape in Sudan, there's always been a sense of a lack or a void in official media. So whether it's local radio or broadcast television, I apologize for the background noise. But official media has always been a little bit, it's been lacking in Sudan. Whether we're talking about the state broadcasters and within the individual states on a local level or on the national level. So we've seen, of course, with the war, most of the FM stations have closed down. You have Sudan TV that, it relocated, but it's pretty much military propaganda, instead of, the national media, focusing on the humanitarian situation and everything. It's become a political tool, but that's not something new for the Sudanese public. So there's always been a situation where between the independent journalists and citizen journalists, social media influencers, and this goes back. I mean, the first time where there was like mass kind of, online mobilization was I believe 2016 was the first time where there was kind of a critical mass of to look towards the civil society and the humanitarian workers, human rights defenders, and these people as the lead to the pressing issues. So with the humanitarian work, it's no different. All of the journalists who have been kind of displaced after the war, or those who remain in Sudan, creating that two-way information, model, it actually depends mostly on the people who are directly involved on humanitarian work on the ground. Asia spoke about the peer-to-peer support and the mutual aid. These have been mostly instrumental with covering these issues, but also with conveying it back to them. We have a few anecdotal case studies. We don't have enough time to go through all of them today, but there have been situations, for example, with Aqua, the displaced in the shelters, and Aqua being kicked out. Just very brief coverage about this and like putting the cameras in front of the right people over there, it created a bigger kind of campaign. This has been the past 2 weeks or so. There are some places where it's a little bit more challenging, of course, for example, in Darfur within the IDP camps, especially in South Darfur and these areas that are kind of surrounded by RSF and, getting humanitarian aid over there being a problem. Zamzam camp right now in Al-Fashir being a problem, but even in these areas, it's very possible, and you can find people willing to do the coverage. And the good thing is that with these IDP communities is that they have, screenings, they have radio, they listen to Radio Libanga, to these broadcasters to actually get the information. And this is actually where I think, and I'm not sure if we want to get into the interventions right now, but the cooperation and coordination between broadcasters, humanitarian workers, and journalists. And I would include citizen journalists to that. That kind of coordination is what would create a very good loop of information, two-way information, that would take the dire needs on the ground, communicate them to the wider public. And when it comes to communicating with these communities themselves, how do we do conflict-sensitive journalism? How are we, creating content that is leading more towards peace and reconciliation rather than flaming the fans? Because that is the main problem right now within the digital space and within the media space in general. The influencers and the pro-war media and rhetoric. We've seen this being devastating when it comes to mobilizing on the ground and fanning the flames of the war. The problem is we've seen this way before the war, especially in West Darfur, in areas that have seen a lot of violence, whether communal violence or from the security apparatus. We've seen where online rhetoric directly influences attacks on the ground and influences raids on villages and things of that sort. So that's kind of the red flag right now. We work on the humanitarian coverage, but the counter, rhetoric to the war, the pro-war rhetoric, is usually something that should be put as a priority. And it's difficult for the people in the humanitarian space to work on this, but people who are working in the media space, we always try and encourage them to make this priority. So I'll keep it there and kind of let Emmanuel steer us from here. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Mossab, and thanks for the three of you. Before we try to discuss a bit collectively on what should be done, what should be better done in terms of support, action, and attention, I would say, because we are talking about lack of attention about what's going on today during this war in Sudan. I just would like to take a first opportunity to open the floor for. Yes, that's great. To open the floor to our audience in the room and online. So if there is any reaction, comments, specific illustration, questions to the panelists, please feel free to raise your hand. Anyone would like to say something? Yes, yeah. Please, Anna.
Thank you very much for these talks from fields. It's very important to hear what's happening in the different countries. I'm from Ukraine, and we have a very big race of the role of social media, of course. And I would say that social media made the game and united Ukrainians in different countries and in Ukraine. But what we face in the eastern Ukraine, that there is a big fight for the attention and influence made by Russians social media and Ukrainian social media. Because maybe you know that in the eastern part, which is closer to Russia, people trust more to Russian social media. So sometimes people don't know who is talking to them. They trust everything because it's social media, because it's trustful source. So did you face such situations, and what you were doing?
Thank you.
People are unaware who's talking to them, but they believe, and propaganda can make any impact on them.
Great. Perhaps I'm going to take a couple of reactions and sections before giving back the floor to our panelists. Any other one in the room? Yes, please.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. I have a question, like, how we have talked about humanitarians and how can we collaborate, but if they have any ideas on how local journalists and media can collaborate with humanitarians and the other way, and how can we support the work as humanitarians?
Okay, great. Yes, please. Here. Online.
Tala?
Yeah, Tala, can you Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Taladola Chai. I work as a senior independent advisor and I'm based in New York. Clearly, we have an agenda. The propaganda is one thing, but an agenda from Meta, from the social media groups that is to uphold a kind of US based model of Western understanding of what media is and what media freedoms are. And that's hard to translate in different countries, and it's not often translated. What can we do to get more funding directly to community-based organizations and research institutions to ensure that this social media agenda is not hijacked by the Western governments? Thank you.
Caroline also has a question.
Thank you very much. What?
Caroline has a question.
Okay, and last question before I give back the floor to the panelists. Sarah?
Caroline?
Caroline, sorry. Oh, Caroline.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. I'm sorry I cannot raise my hand from the online show. I'm Caroline Dina with Fondation Hirondelle. My question is how to convince not only the donors, but all the actors involved in fragile context to support local media before the crisis arrives. Because at the time of the crisis, the media must have built the trust, the relationship, and the consumption habits with an audience, and it doesn't come from one day to the other. And so media need to be present before, during, and after the crisis. And very often we see the funding coming during the crisis, but not before, preparing the media to respond, and not after, keeping them as key actors in society. So what kind of arguments can we all develop to make the support of media not only at the time of crisis, but every time in fragile contexts like health or education? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Perhaps I'm going to give the floor to our panelists. So I don't know who would like to start, and you are not obliged to respond to the 4 questions, but definitely I think your perspective on how to engage more with humanitarians, hands in hands in terms of collaboration, this notion of trust in social media through the example of the Donbass conflict situation now in Ukraine, and also all related to the propaganda and more funding for the community. Perhaps I start by you, Mossad, and after Hasia and Khadija.
Okay, thank you. For our colleague from Ukraine and Donbass, the issue of propaganda, foreign propaganda, social media. This is also where
but it's back.
Differentiate.
This, it worked, I don't know, maybe it's on the other, it worked out well. It's just my recordings that disappeared from my computer.
For example,
Yeah,
but it's still working.
this computer.
Oh, it's because yeah, because it's on the
So my computer,
this is kind of, detecting it is always an issue, but the investigative work of, exposing these outfits that are doing this is very important. Egypt as well. Egypt has had a lot of media and a lot of influence, kind of supporting the army and having it, even way before the war. This has been an issue on both sides of this conflict. So chasing the trolls online is always a very tedious thing. So, we go always back to the issue of content is king. Countering the narratives becomes important. A lot of times when, you start doing some social media analysis, these trolls and, all of these, special interests, they start, a certain narrative starts to appear from them. So the challenge usually becomes is not to get engulfed in chasing them down, but countering the narrative itself. And so, for example, in Sudan, the anti-war, bloc is a lot bigger than the pro-war bloc, but the pro-war is a lot louder. You know, it's a lot louder, it gets a lot more attention. So I'm always a fan of countering the narrative on that. How to support this humanitarian effort, I'll leave that a little bit to Khadija and Asia. They have a little bit more experience in that. But our colleague Tala, I think from the US, we've struggled a lot with policies specifically from the platforms themselves. So, for example, from Facebook and from Instagram and these things, we find that a lot of legitimate independent media from Sudan is being blocked. A lot of this I don't think is done on purpose. It's more a response to the algorithms and to reporting, because we have to understand that even the belligerents in Sudan, they have troll farms that they use to actually do mass reporting and stuff to get pages blocked. Now, for us, always the deterrent to this, or whether it's Western policies directly on media or social media, and for there not to be any kind of coercion for the local actors, we always kind of encourage the local organizing bodies. So, for example, there's something called the Sudan Media Forum. You can find, I'll put it in the chat, the link to it. But Sudan Media Forum has almost 30 independent media bodies in Sudan that definitely do not support the war. They're working towards highlighting the humanitarian situation and things like that. So creating that connection with these kind of bodies. And for example, one of the bodies within the Sudan Media Forum is the Sudan Journalist Syndicate. This is the union for journalists, and it has thousands of independent journalists as a part of it. So I always find, connecting with these kind of bodies would be the best way to be a deterrent from any kind of coercion from, wherever it would come from. And there's a guarantee to kind of find the real information from the ground without any kind of, coercion to it.
Thank you, Musab. Yeah, do you have a last point?
Yeah, just the last point about how to support media before the war. I think it's also through these bodies and looking, but answering also the question of sustainability for media, because that's the biggest thing. Is media going to depend on donors and international funders, or is it going to create its own revenue streams locally? This is a headache for all journalists around the world. So in Sudan, it becomes more of a problem. So I think investing in mechanisms of how to address this issue of sustainability for local media would be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Asia, please.
Sorry. Thank you. These are all very interesting and important questions. I'd just like to touch on the humanitarian media question and how humanitarians can do better to support local journalists and work with them. Just wanted to share some numbers in the beginning that more than 1,000 journalists have lost their jobs because of this conflict. And this accounts for more than 50% of journalists in the country. Most media outlets have had to, traditional media outlets in the capital, in Khartoum, and in other conflict-affected parts of the country, and therefore have had to close down radio stations, newspapers, TV stations in Khartoum as well. I want us to think of journalists as civilians, because they are, and as people impacted by this conflict and have lost their tools that they use to create stories with, that they have families who need to survive. And it's really sad when we see a lot of journalists doing different jobs that are not connected to their to media work, making falafels and selling them, working, selling vegetables, so doing other jobs other than their media work, which is necessary in a crisis like the one in Sudan. And that's why we see, I think, disinformation and misinformation on the rise. And as Musab noted, the pro-war rhetoric is really loud, although most people want this conflict to come to an end.
and we also see an increase in hate speech and the manipulation of trying to trigger certain emotions in people, and trying to trigger more support for this conflict from the civilian population. So we see this happening in a really with an information landscape that has shifted severely with limited journalists. Of course, there are many great independent media outlets that are creating incredible content that focuses on the stories of people affected by conflict and trying to highlight the humanitarian impact of this conflict. But we also need to support the local journalists, hundreds of local journalists that are now unable to do their role at a time where we need journalists to share information, to highlight what's happening, but also, most importantly, to address the information needs of people affected by conflict and displacement, to address high-risk rumor or high-risk information, to counter, as Mozab said, this pro-war narrative, but also to counter hate speech. And I also think, despite Sudan being, having the top displacement, the highest displacement numbers in the world, it's kind of an ignored humanitarian response with very little media coverage. So I think all of this, the limited international media coverage, but also the massive impact of this conflict on civilians has affected how Sudan is portrayed and how stories are told or not told. I just wanted to make a few suggestions here that there could be more grants to support journalists to buy equipment, to purchase the equipment they need to be able to do their work. They have so many stories to tell. They are in a terrible but unique position because they've gone through the displacement, they've seen conflict, they're living in conflict settings. And so just equipping them with the tools they need so they can do their work, equipping, also supporting media houses that have had to shut down, which were sources of income and survival for so many families and journalists. Humanitarian organizations can be more active by providing data, by providing information about the humanitarian situation, so that the media can tell stories, can tell really good stories as well. And the other thing is, this is an active armed conflict, so we really need to share more about protection of journalists. We need to also remind the parties to the conflict of the protection that the journalists should have in this setting and their role. So I think talking more to journalists and having online workshops in areas where, and having in-person trainings in areas where it's possible, where internet is accessible. We know now that some parts of Omdurman, which is in a conflict setting, have connectivity, so having some online sessions talking about creating content about conflict, talking about the ethics of photojournalism, having some of these discussions, and also one suggestion. I've had various discussions with journalists, and one suggestion that came in was linked to protection. They wanted a protection network for journalists to report violations against them, because telling a story and reporting on the conflict and reporting on the civilian, the humanitarian impact of this conflict on civilians puts them also at risk. So talking about how to better protect themselves, and also telling humanitarian stories. I think there are many things that I think we can do more of as humanitarians to support the local media. Over.
Thank you very much, Asia. And Khadija, please, can you add a couple of reflections based on the questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Manuel and colleagues who asked questions. I think my colleagues Asia and Musab covered most of the points, and I just would like to think maybe about advocating for donors, and there is a question how funding to the humanitarian aid workers and the humanitarian response in general. I think donors and international community, which is supporting Sudan, they have to look for alternatives, not to go for the traditional system for allocating money like SHF, SAFE allocation, or through direct partnership. And there are a lot of good experience when the fund goes through a consortium group of NGOs or INGOs to provide assistance to certain groups through collective efforts. I think this is now should be like another way. We need to have different alternatives and another way of supporting humanitarian aid workers, especially the grassroots community-based organizations and the small CBOs and those who are providing assistance, as Asia mentioned, that the kitchen and the food support, which is cooked in the middle of local residents, is led by a group of people and supporters from youth and community diaspora. So those are the ones who we're supposed to reach out to them without conditions and not to oblige them with a certain constraints or conditions. Let us think about this, how we can support them. The issue of donors, how to be convinced to support media and to restore the image after being maybe lost the trust during the last period and the regime of the last the regime of al-Bashir and others. And still we can say that media is still hijacked by these groups. So we can compare the situation with our situation right now, where we have maybe the worst case and the worst suffering and a lot of miserable situation, but no one reflected this, no one can see. We are the only Sudanese inside. We can see that based on the communication from the networks on the ground or the friends or communities speaking about the torture, speaking about the grave violation committed by the two parties and the conflicting parties. So if the media or some of the media staff are there, these can be also reflected. So we compare ourselves with, for example, with the current colleagues and the current nation, the current crisis and for the nation of Palestine. Those people, despite the suffering, despite all this, their issues are being raised, their voices being heard by different media and local and international media. So we need also our voices, our suffering, our miserable situation to be reflected in the media, to be seen, so that we can also look at donors and convince them how they can support us. The issue of building capacities of the local journalists also an issue where we need maybe international community, international and the big media houses to look at this, how they can support the innocent and small groups of journalists. And the journalists, as Mus'ab maybe mentioned, that they are not isolated, they are part of their communities. There are a lot of commitment based on their responsibilities for their families, for their entire groups while they are moving, and they have different movement, like secondary movement from location to location, chasing by military organs and by the security organs themselves to protect themselves. So it is difficult for them to operate and function as been before, because their safety, their lives also affected severely by the ongoing conflict. So let us think maybe together and collectively how we can support journalists in Sudan to work efficiently and to restore their capacities. We have many good journalists. We have many good media people and institutions. So look at that and how we can also find a room to support them technically, financially, and advocate on behalf of them as well. Thank you. Over to you, Emmanuel and colleagues.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Khadija. And I'm gonna open the floor again for a second series of questions and comments, but I would like to go a bit further in this, and we have 25 minutes to the hand, perhaps on this advocacy dimension. And we know it's not enough to raise awareness and to publicly state about what's going on for humanitarian in terms of humanitarian situation and also media attention. And probably, I don't know how was thought in the media reflection on the ground to have a kind of collective tribune engaging as well humanitarian actors and try to be more on a denunciation mode or highlighting really strongly about the working condition and the situation to the main political stakeholders, and including the Arab League and the African Union, you know, and because we know the funding is going to remain slow and going to be difficult to in the coming months. But just thinking out of the box, how far would humanitarians going to be ready to support local media activities and vice versa? So I hope we can discuss a bit further on this. And Sarah online, you had a question or comments?
I can go ahead and ask my question.
Yes.
Oh, okay. My name is Sarah Antonio from the ASAL Humanitarian Network in Kenya. Great conversation and experience from the panelists who've shared their experiences. I think we get to appreciate the different contexts in which media has to work. I work in the advocacy and communication space in Kenya. So my question to the panelists is, what has been your experience and what thoughts can you share with working with the humanitarian actors within the Sudan context and also with the community, especially in countering misinformation and also propaganda? And what role can humanitarian actors, whether local or international humanitarian actors, what role can they play in supporting the media within the Sudan space? And how the local community, what roles that local communities or the citizens can actually play in ensuring that the information that is shared is information that promotes more of peace as opposed to promoting the pro-war propaganda. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. In the room, any comments, questions? Yes, please.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name's Helen McElhenney with the CDAC network, and I want to say a special want hello to Khadija, who's represented our seat on this panel so well. Thank you, Khadija. For those that don't know CDAC terribly well, that it was initially generated by a bunch of pioneer journalists and aid workers who wanted to do this bridging between media development and the information gaps in humanitarian response. And so it does roll out these kind of initiatives in lots of crisis contexts, including Sudan, where it looks at how has this information space broken down and how can we repair it in many ways. And some of the leading media development players, many of whom might be here in the room actually, who are members, you know, Internews and BBC Media Action and Deutsche Welle and all these other ones, have got great tools for leaning into this problem and trying to bridge some of the things that panelists have come up with. Where I think we are still struggling is figuring out how you navigate the scale of the weaponization of information that panelists have touched upon. We've always had propaganda, etc., but we're in a new paradigm, not just because of the scale of the geopolitical actors that are in play here, but also because some of the platforms that are so influential to both helping people get access to information, but are also performing the weaponization or being utilized. Now, I had a couple of questions to panelists about how, when we are seeing this narrative testing initially turning up, and I think most of them referenced it particularly, how rapidly are we able to identify this and channel it straight up to these platforms, notwithstanding their ability or their inclination to respond to us, but like, have we figured out that bridging mechanism, and if so, what is it? And if we haven't, can we agree that that's a really quick win that we want to focus on? So question to panelists about, like, how are we bridging to the platforms? Is it working? Can we improve? And then an adjacent question is around how we avoid the trap of politicization, or we as humanitarians must not step into the space of verifying political narratives or one way or another in what is a highly contested information environment. And how do we collectively share and upskill everyone to avoid that trap?
Thank you. Difficult questions, but hope well equipped. Yes, please, the back.
I think it was Khadija that said at the beginning that the current war in Sudan, the spotlight has gone, and I mean, compared to Darfur in 2003, when the spotlight was much higher. So what is the reason why is the spotlight taken off now?
Thank you. A last question? Yes, please.
I didn't present before. Sorry for
That's fine.
saying again. Miguel, what's really good. So I'm on the other side. I'm not a journalist. I'm more a humanitarian, and I was interested in this session a lot because I consume local information. So when I got deployed, I rely a lot on local media because we don't have the information as humanitarians that we can have on the ground. You know, we do assessments, we do needs, we try to track the response, but the real information is up there and is based on communities and local journalism. So getting deeper into this collaboration, how, I don't know, probably like a science fiction or something, or like vision in the future, but how the cycle of the humanitarian cycle that needs response, awareness, can we collaborate to really get, I don't know, you are more efficient in the response and address the needs on the population.
Thank you. So perhaps Khadija, I'm gonna give you the floor first, particularly on the last of our different questions as you like, but please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emmanuel and the colleagues. Regarding the spotlight and then why we are now coming again and requesting, despite the fact that before there is no any light shed on the crisis of Sudan. Basically, before we were, I think, and this is also for many of Sudanese, that we were expecting that the conflict is going to be end in 2 days, 3 days. We are not expecting, or none of Sudanese people were like assuming that such crisis will be scaled up and going to extend out of Khartoum and to reach IDPs and the massive number of people who fled to Jazeera, to other states, and to be attacked again. Because our assumption in the beginning, it is like the very maybe small conflict between the two conflicting parties, and it will end soon, because Sudan was like experienced since the revolution many attacks against the civilians, people and youth, while they are moving around for their rights in the streets during the revolution days and the organized marshals and the movements. So we were expecting that this type of conflict is just going to end within a very limited time and not going to expand to other states, especially to other places where Sudanese, the IDPs, seek refuge there. Then again, I think the issue supposed to be come to the surface and to be advocated through different layers of influential entities internationally and locally, because the massive and the grave of violations, the nature of the graves is exceeding what we can call as a criminal insult, or we can't even find words for that. The way of raping of the small girls, children, like more than 20, rape one lady repeatedly in an open space in front of her father, in front of her brother, which is also killing him or the family as a whole in the 1 hour many times. So such type of grave violations were never been in Sudan, and we never even heard about it in other places. And they feel proud about that. Those who are committing such type of violence and bad misbehaviors, they are very proud about it, and they move around, and they also share a lot of videos, and many they capture photos, and they feel like as if they are proving their manhood. And none of the humanitarian community is blaming, just small statements or condemning the issue, and in Instagram, or in an article in 1 line or 2 lines from the senior humanitarian aid workers. But there is nothing. And maybe I just again go back to my point for the entire humanitarian community. Yes, you did a lot, guys, and there is a lot of support provided to Sudan, and we are grateful for that. But again, compared to the violence and the grave violations that happen in Sudan, we need to bring back attention to Sudan, and we need to put Sudan in the spotlight again. And we are here in Sudan on the daily basis. We receive hundreds of cases, and we can't even, we feel ourselves that we are weak. We can't provide any support to the survivors. And in Jazeera itself, the violation was like um, you can't imagine that. And when we speak about that, or we hear the stories from the survivors or the relatives, you can assume that those people are exaggerated. But when it comes to the reality, and this proven by the people themselves, so we found it like clear and true. So we need your support, colleagues, to put it again, and to shed the light on Sudan and the crisis that's happening and ongoing on daily basis. Thank you, Emmanuel, and colleagues, over to you.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Khadija. Perhaps, Mossab, if you can come in on the platform question from our fellow colleagues from CDAC, and on the Darfur 2003 and today, what you would consider as a difference in terms of coverage and the reasons why, please.
Okay, I got disconnected for a bit, so I missed some of Helen's question, but from the lead up to it, I kind of got the gist of it. So for the platforms and the narratives, the issue of, the pro-war narrative, and, the only challenge is kind of differentiating between what's genuinely coming from citizens, as they've been, also indoctrinated into this issue of like the only solution is a military solution. Showing how there can be peaceful solutions and stuff becomes the counter to that. Navigating it is pretty difficult. The idea of trying to find like where the narrative is, but this is where then the digital tools come in, like things like social media analysis, using tools like Polis and these things to find out where the points of contention are and where the points of agreement are among people. That's kind of, and feeding that into some kind of editorial process. So I think that's usually kind of what we were looking at as far as how to counter these narratives. Well, Sarah earlier asked a question about the misinformation and how to work with the communities themselves. I think this also goes back to having the journalists, Asia and Khadija talked about the journalists themselves as civilians. And I think working with them and training also, capacity development for citizen journalists. I'm not a fan of drawing a very solid line between journalists and between citizen journalists and people who have the potential. I mean, human rights defenders, people who, lawyers, these people make some of the best journalists, especially when it comes to, covering human rights issues and even humanitarian issues. But the activists, and I think because in Sudan we have since 2019, we have a very rich tradition of activism among youth and volunteering. So within the past 10 years, there's been a huge boom in that. So a lot of times we find like these young people, these activists and volunteers are the best people to work with when it comes to covering the critical issues on the ground or when it comes to conveying information, because they're usually linked into, teams that can do mobile cinema, going from village to village, theater troops that can do PSAs and awareness and things like that. So getting the communities involved through these actors is usually the most critical point for me as far as bridging that gap. The Darfur 2003 question and the difference between then and now. The biggest difference is the advancement in technology, whether it's the digital platforms, whether it's the ease of coverage itself, and smartphones, mobile journalism is huge for us as far as working with people in the most remote areas in Sudan. The 2003, of course, it was a very tight chokehold on information coming out, from the government, from regional bodies, from the Arab League, from all of these bodies. It was and what comes out usually comes out through the UN or UN agencies and international bodies. So there was an issue with credibility of who's conveying the information. Now, we have IDP communities doing their own coverage. So that's I think the biggest difference right now. Of course, it's facing a huge mountain of hate speech and speech that's ethnically charged and tribalism, along with the war, kind of infused with the war rhetoric. So I'm not sure if I answered the questions properly due to being disconnected a little bit, but I'll leave it to the panel. See if we need any more clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mossab. Asia, would you add to say a word on also the local community and how to better work as humanitarians to support local media?
Sure, I can say a lot on that, but I'll be brief.
Yes.
Just looking at AAP two-way communication, it's now been a year since this conflict, and it feels like still online. There isn't much response or limited response to people affected by conflict. There are questions and questions directed that are very relevant to humanitarian work, like who can I reach out to find my missing loved one? My father is missing and I need, which organization should I reach out to? Sometimes questions are put on the pages of or accounts, of humanitarian organizations, and sometimes they go without a response. And so something that we're trying to do is to encourage humanitarians to participate, to respond, because if we do not respond, then someone else might respond, and they may provide inaccurate information despite having the good intentions of helping, but they may not have the best information. Someone else might jump in and provide advice to a GBV survivor or their family. It might not be, despite the intentions and wanting to do good and wanting to help, it might not be the most accurate or reliable information.
So people have been, it feels like, you know, what Khadija pointed out, this sense of being alone. And I don't want to be dramatic, but Etim and I have been conducting social media listening now since the beginning of the conflict. And there is a feeling, you know, that this lack of responsiveness, and still humanitarian accounts being very much focused on activity updates and not really engaging in two-way communication, and also understanding. This is something I remember Khadija and I spoke about, that this is a different conflict. This is a different time. This is Sudan post-revolution. There is a culture of using social media to organize, to discuss, to counter misinformation, to share advice with others. This is how you protect yourself from tear gas. There's a generation that understands how they can use social media to support each other and organize. And so we can no longer ignore the voices online, but we also need to pay attention to, you know, Mus'ab noted in the beginning about 30% of people have access to internet. That number is much limited today because of internet blackouts, communication blackouts in some parts of the country, and the fact that internet connectivity has been turbulent since the beginning of this conflict. So having these offline tools, offline options for two-way communication, supporting communities in the best way that we can, really investing in AAP, not only talking about it, but, you know, taking some action. We have some great examples recently from MSF responding online. We've flagged some posts to humanitarians where we've seen like really a shift, responding to a question online about their services. In Sudan, another comment in a private women's group about having to potentially remove your scarf to register for refugee status. In Uganda, we flagged this to UNHCR and they've taken action to correct this. And so there are ways that we can be more involved and more engaged. There really is a vacuum in accurate and reliable information, timely information most importantly, but also that if we don't respond, if we are not engaging, if we are not encouraging dialogue, because we're not on the ground everywhere. Access is a major issue, but at least we should be able to facilitate two-way communication and address some of these critical information gaps. And we've already noted various examples during this session of how information can save lives. And it's not something, a motto that we repeat, but really it is life-saving. So, thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Asia, and thank you again to the panelists for your time and your voices and reflections. So it's time to wrap up in 1 minute. There are many open questions, I have to say, that's going to remain, but I would like to insist on three dimensions. The first one, there is an urgency to do more collectively, courageously, and politically when we are thinking about Sudan war. Second, we really heard about the determination of local media, and we have to pay tribute to all local Sudanese citizens that are engaging on a daily basis, local journalists, and all the humanitarian actors that support them on the ground. But they need support. They need support now, on the long run, financially and technically. And thirdly, I would add that was all what you said, and Sudan population survive and suffers on a daily basis, and the humanitarian responses and protection responses are not at all at the scale of this tragedy, and it needs to be more denunciated publicly and supported by humanitarian actors in terms of massive priority advocacies by all stakeholders, and we did not have the time to discuss about our fellow colleagues from UN agencies and others, but definitely it should be more as put as a priority. Thank you so much for your time, and wish you the best. And thanks again, Khadija, Mus'ab, and Hasia for your determination and engagement.